role, and its primary uses are to store application files as well as virtual machine files such as virtual hard disks. We can also apply storage quality of service policies against our scale-out file server. The benefit here is that if we're storing multiple virtual hard disks on the scale-out file server, the storage quality of service policy can set the minimum and maximum disk IOPS to all of those virtual hard disks at once. When we talk about the Windows Nano server operating system, the scale-out file server is very important because a Nano server's primary use is to run as an application container server or a Hyper-V container server. So the scale-out file server goes hand in hand with the Nano server. It also allows concurrent access to shared folders from multiple cluster nodes at the same time. This means that they can read and also write to the shares on the scale-out file server. To configure scale-out file server, we require Active Directory and a failover cluster. Also, each cluster node must have the file server role service installed. We can create a scale-out file server by using the file server clustered role template, which is available in the failover cluster manager. The result is that we'll have a computer object in Active Directory that represents our scale-out file server. Let's take a look at how we would actually configure it using the failover cluster manager. Here in the failover cluster manager, we can see in the nodes view that we've got two servers, server 2016-2 as well as server 2016-3. Now, setting up a scale-out file server is similar whether you're talking about a Nano server cluster or standard Windows Server operating systems. I'm going to right-click on Roles on the left and I'll choose Configure Role. To build a scale-out file server, I need to select the File Server template. When I select that, it'll check the cluster nodes to make sure they've got the file server role service installed. Otherwise, I would have a message down below that tells me I need to take care of that first. We're going to go ahead and click Next, and I'm going to choose a scale-out file server for application data. Then I'll click Next. I'm going to call it SOFS-1 for scale-out file server 1. Then I'll click Next. I'll click Next again in the wizard. And after a few moments, I'll have my scale-out file server role created. So I'll click Finish, and we can see that the role is indeed running currently on the server. If we take a look at Active Directory, Users and Computers, and we look at the Computers container, we can see that we've got our scale-out file server computer account that was created. And under the description column, it says that it's a failover cluster virtual network name account. Back in the failover cluster manager, the next thing that we would do is we would right-click on our scale-out file server and we would choose to add a file share. But sometimes if you do this too quickly immediately after the scale-out file server role was configured, you might get a message that states that you'll have to wait because the client access point isn't ready. So all we need to do is wait a few minutes and then we can proceed with the creation of file shares on the scale-out file server. Okay, so after waiting a few minutes, we can now right-click on our scale-out file server and choose Add File Share. Here the wizard will ask us what type of profile we'd like to use to build our new file share. Well, because we're going to be storing things like SQL database files or perhaps Hyper-V virtual hard disks on it, we're going to choose the SMB Share-Applications profile. Here in the description it says this is used for things like Hyper-V, databases, and other server-based applications. I'll go ahead and click Next. So for my scale-out file server, I have to choose a location that will host my shared folder that I'm about to create. And it's showing me my existing volumes in clustered shared volume storage down below. I'll choose the first clustered shared storage volume, and I'll click Next. My share name here will be VHDs for virtual hard disks. So I can see that the remote path to that is // the name of my scale-out file server, in this case SOFS-1, and then my share is called VHDs. Now this is important because for virtual machines stored on Nano Hyper-V servers, that's where we're going to direct them to store their virtual hard disks. So I'll click Next. And it's set for enable continuous availability, and I can't change that. The only thing I really have access to here is to determine whether or not I want to encrypt data access. So I'm not going to select that, and I'll click Next. I will accept the default permissions to access the files on my share, although I could click the Customized Permissions button and make changes as appropriate. Then I'll click Next, and then I'll create my shared folder. At this point, it's been created, so I'm going to go ahead and click Close. So now when I select my scale-out file server here in the Failover Cluster Manager down below, I can click Shares, and I can see my shared locations that were created and made available that way. Here is our VHD's shared folder. So for creating new virtual machines on a Nano platform, I would store the virtual hard disks in this location, and if I want to move existing virtual machines to a clustered role, then I could make sure first that their virtual hard disks are placed in this location. In this video, we learned how to configure the scale-out file server role.